There is a specific type of fear that no one talks about openly, the fear of the nice guy waking up. It is not a fear of violence or direct confrontation. It is a more subtle, more intimate, more disturbing fear. A fear that runs through your body when someone who has always been kind is no longer available. When the one who has always absorbed the pain of others without complaining, the one who has translated family chaos into silent compassion, begins to drift away. And this distancing is not announced with harsh words or slamming doors. It reveals itself in silence, in gentle refusal, in unexpected limits, in no longer being found where you always were. Because what scares us most is not change. It is the absence of access. It is the end of the certainty that that person will be there forever, unconditionally, enduring everything, swallowing everything, understanding everything. Family feels it. Friends feel it. Partners feel it. But few recognize what is really happening. The good person is not becoming someone worse. They are becoming someone whole. You may know this person. Maybe it's you. The one who always answered calls in the middle of the night, even when exhausted. Who welcomed others' pain without ever having their own pain seen. The one who kept the peace in chaotic relationships, sacrificing their own inner stability. The one who confused love with self-abandonment. The one who confused empathy with servitude. The one who confused being good with slowly disappearing. For years, sometimes decades, you learned to become indispensable as a way to feel loved. You became the problem solver, the unofficial advisor, the silent emotional caregiver. And the more available you were, the more people leaned on you. But also, the more they forgot to ask how you were doing. Because your strength was mistaken for an absence of pain. Your consistency was mistaken for obligation. And that's when something starts to crack. At first, it's subtle. A tiredness that won't go away. An irritation that arises for no reason. A desire to disappear without knowing exactly why. But deep down, the good guy can't take it anymore. And this exhaustion is not a sign of weakness. It is a sign of emotional saturation. Carl Jung called this shadow tension. The internal conflict between the persona, the social mask you wear to be accepted, and the rejected parts of your true self, which are exiled to the unconscious, waiting for a chance to exist. For the good guy, this shadow contains dangerous truths. The ability to say no without guilt. The right to preserve oneself without having to justify it. The power to choose oneself even if it displeases those who have always depended on your nullification. And when this shadow begins to emerge, the world around you goes on alert. Because the good guy who awakens does not shout, does not attack, does not blame. He just stops. He stops explaining. They stop justifying themselves. They stop allowing others to drain their emotional life without reciprocity. That's when they become dangerous. Not because they hurt others, but because they no longer allow themselves to be hurt in the same way. Because they no longer accept being used as an emotional shield. Because they no longer mold themselves to the discomfort of others. Because they finally draw a line between what they offer and what they need. Today, you will understand why this awakening is not an outburst. It is a calling. A reconnection with parts of yourself that were sacrificed for the sake of maintaining dysfunctional bonds. You will see that the good guy who awakens does not become less loving. He becomes more authentic. That his strength does not lie in putting up with everything, but in recognizing what he should no longer carry. And that the real danger they represent is to the systems that fed on their denial. Throughout this video, we will walk through this transformation. You will see why boundless kindness is a slow form of self-destruction, why denying yourself in the name of love is a recipe for soul fragmentation, and why choosing yourself for the first time may seem selfish to others, but is actually the most radical act of self-love you've ever done. Because in the end, the journey of the good guy isn't about becoming tough. It's about becoming whole. And that's the real threat to a world that benefits from your exhaustion. You finally complete. You were taught that emotional depth is synonymous with fragility. That feeling a lot means being less resilient. That the person who cries easily, who is moved by the suffering of others, who carries the emotional weight of relationships, is automatically weaker. But this is one of the biggest lies our society perpetuates. Look at the nice person in your family for a moment. Really look at them. They are the ones who can remain present during conversations that would drain the life force out of any normal person, who listen to the same problems for the 100th time without exploding, who absorb the anger, frustration, and despair of everyone around them and somehow keep functioning. This is not weakness. This is superhuman emotional capacity. The problem isn't sensitivity. The problem is a world that confuses depth with unlimited availability. That trains empathetic people to believe their value is directly linked to their emotional usefulness to others. That equates love with emotional servitude. Our modern culture has created a devastating confusion. It mixes kindness with weakness, empathy with infinite availability, and emotional intelligence with emotional slavery. The result? Deeply capable people are conditioned to believe that they exist primarily to serve the emotional needs of others. Jung realized something that popular psychology has not yet fully grasped. We develop what he called a persona, a social mask we wear to gain acceptance. For the nice person, that persona is the eternally available one, the one who exists primarily to absorb what others refuse to process themselves. But every persona has a shadow. And for the nice person, that shadow contains exactly what they fear most to express: the ability to say no without guilt, to choose self-preservation over approval, to prioritize their own emotional well-being. Sarah discovered this at age 32. She was a social worker by profession, an emotional caregiver by compulsion. For 3 decades, she was the safe haven for storms that weren't hers. The family conflict mediator who absorbed the emotional fragments so that others could emerge unscathed. The friend everyone turned to during their existential crises in the wee hours of the morning. Sarah had become a sanctuary for everyone's pain, while her own remained unattended, unloved, invisible. She believed with every fiber of her being that people could change if she just loved them enough, if she understood them enough, if she absorbed their emotional pain and turned it into wisdom. She had perfected the art of being okay when she was falling apart inside, of smiling through emotional hunger, of remaining present during conversations that drained her life force while pretending that hearing the same problems for the 100th time didn't exhaust her soul. Sarah had developed an almost mystical ability to translate dysfunction into compassion, to transform the emotional chaos of others into forced harmony, to make emotionally immature people feel understood without having to grow up. But there's a truth that no one tells the good guy. You've become so good at carrying the emotions that others discard that you've forgotten what it feels like to have your own emotions carried by someone else. You've become so skilled at being the safe haven that you've forgotten that you also deserve shelter from the storm. Sarah's nervous system was registering a bill that her mind refused to calculate. Chronic headaches that no medication could touch. Insomnia that left her staring at the ceiling. Her body exhausted, but her mind racing with problems that weren't hers. A constant feeling of emotional drowning, as if she were giving mouth-to-mouth resuscitation to everyone. But no one was doing the same for her. Her body was screaming a language her mind refused to recognize. A heaviness in her chest that felt like drowning in slow motion. Trying to breathe in relationships where she always gave artificial respiration, but never received it. What Sarah didn't know was that her kindness had become a container for everything else that others refused to process. Her emotional availability had created a pattern where she existed primarily to absorb what others couldn't bear in themselves. She had convinced herself that being needed was the same as being loved, that being useful was the same as being valued, but it's not. And here's the part no one tells you about nice people. They're not nice because it's easy. They're nice despite it being devastatingly difficult. They've developed an emotional tolerance that borders on the superhuman. But tolerance isn't the same as health. Jung described this deep imbalance as a crack in the psyche, the unbearable tension between the persona we show to the world and the dark parts we exile to gain acceptance. For the nice person, that persona is the eternal helper, the one who is always fine, always understanding, always giving from a seemingly endless well of compassion. But beneath this carefully constructed mask of infinite availability lives someone who has never felt truly supported. Someone who carries the emotions that others discard as if they were personally responsible for healing everyone around them. Someone who has convinced themselves that being needed is the same as being loved. But there is a price being paid that no one sees. And that price is not just psychological, it is existential. It is the cost of abandoning yourself a little more each day, until all that is left is a shadow of who you used to be, living for the emotional needs of everyone but yourself. Change does not announce itself with fanfare. It does not happen all at once in some dramatic moment of revelation. Instead, it begins in whispers. Small changes that others dismiss as temporary stress, mood swings, or just going through a phase. You stop responding to messages right away. Texts that once sent you into a spiral of anxiety about keeping others waiting now go unread for hours, sometimes days. You let calls go to voicemail without that familiar pang of guilt. You withdraw from conversations that once consumed hours of your emotional energy. You stop laughing at the right moment or smiling to ease someone's discomfort. Your body is present, but your soul has quietly taken a step back, creating space between who you are and who you have been performing. Sarah felt this on a typical Tuesday when her sister called upset about the same relationship pattern they had discussed hundreds of times before. The same toxic dynamic, the same excuses, the same request for Sarah to absorb the emotional chaos and turn it into wisdom. It was the familiar pattern. Crisis, call Sarah, dump the emotional chaos, feel better, hang up, repeat in 2 weeks. And for the first time in her life, Sarah felt nothing. Not anger. She had moved past anger years ago, not frustration. Frustration required the belief that things could change, not even compassion, that well had finally run dry. Just a crystal clear, deep clarity that seemed to come from the deepest part of her being. I'm done. Jung called it the tension of opposites, the unbearable psychological pressure of holding light and shadow, love and resentment, hope and disappointment, care and exhaustion, all at the same time, until something inside simply can no longer sustain the contradiction. Maybe you felt this tension before. The way your body says yes while your soul screams no. The way you smile while something inside you dies a little more. Sarah's breaking point didn't come during a dramatic fight or obvious betrayal. It came on a regular Tuesday afternoon when her sister called upset about the same relationship pattern they had discussed hundreds of times before. The same toxic dynamic, the same excuses, the same request for Sarah to absorb the emotional chaos and turn it into wisdom. But instead of the familiar, "Tell me everything, I'm here for you," Sarah said something that would change everything. "I'm not available for this conversation right now." No justification, no elaborate explanation of why she couldn't carry someone else's pain at that moment. No apology for having boundaries, no offer to schedule a better time. Just a simple, clear statement of her current reality. Her sister was in silent shock. Then came the predictable response. "You're being selfish. I need to talk to someone. What's wrong with you?" And for the first time in her 32 years, Sarah replied, "Yes, I'm being selfish, and there's nothing wrong with me." That yes is the most dangerous word a nice person can learn to say. Because once you stop being driven by the desperate fear of losing someone, you are driven by something deeper and infinitely more powerful. The absolute refusal to lose yourself anymore. Sarah's wall wasn't built overnight. It rose slowly, brick by brick, built from every time she was ignored in a conversation she was actively facilitating. Every time her kindness was mistaken for weakness. Every time her availability was taken for granted instead of appreciated. Every time someone took her attentive ear for granted while never offering their own. That wall doesn't scream, or blame or demand apologies for past hurts. It doesn't need revenge or validation. It simply stands solid and unshakable between the person you were and the person you are becoming. And you stand behind it, no longer afraid, no longer guilty, but finally unavailable to be used. Jung understood that the psyche has a natural impulse toward wholeness, toward integration. When we fragment ourselves, hiding our needs to maintain our relationships, suppressing our authentic responses to keep the peace, something inside begins to push toward healing, toward reclamation of what we abandoned to be accepted. This is not cruelty. This is not emotional disconnection or dissociation or any of the other words people will use to try to blame you back into your old patterns. This is your nervous system finally saying what your voice never could. I've had enough. What part of yourself have you silenced just to feel loved? What aspects of your authentic self have you buried so deep that you've almost forgotten they exist? Collapse is not your weakness revealing itself. It is your strength finally refusing to hide anymore. It is your soul saying, I will not fragment myself anymore. I won't abandon myself for the comfort of anyone else. I won't disappear just to make others feel complete. This is the moment most people mistake for coldness. Friends, family, romantic partners. They watch in confusion and often alarm as you stop performing emotional labor as if it were your life's purpose. They call you distant, different, changed. They say you're not yourself anymore, which is ironic because you're actually becoming more yourself than you've ever been. They want the old you back, the one who absorbed their chaos and called it care, who translated their dysfunction into compassion, who made their emotional immaturity seem like someone else's responsibility. But in Jungian psychology, what is happening is not coldness or cruelty. It is something much deeper, and yes, infinitely more dangerous to those who benefited from your previous patterns of self-abandonment. It is shadow integration. For most of your life, you have carried what Jung called the persona, the mask of the perpetual giver, the eternal helper, the one who exists primarily to serve the emotional needs of others. This persona was likely formed in childhood when you learned that love was conditional on your ability to make others comfortable, to be what they needed rather than who you were. But every persona has a shadow, and for the good guy, that shadow contains all the self-preservation, healthy boundaries, and life-preserving selfishness that you were taught to reject as bad, selfish, or unloving. Sarah's integration began the day she stopped explaining herself. Her sister called again, expecting the usual session of emotional support that had become the primary currency of their relationship. The familiar pattern: crisis, call Sarah, dump the emotional chaos, feel better, hang up, repeat in 2 weeks. But instead of the familiar, tell me everything, I'm here for you, Sarah said something that would change everything. I'm not available for that conversation right now. No justification. No elaborate explanation of why she couldn't carry someone else's pain at that moment. No apology for having boundaries. No offer to schedule a better time. Just a simple, clear statement of her current reality. Her sister was in silent shock. Then came the predictable response. You're being selfish. I need to talk to someone. What's wrong with you? And for the first time in her 32 years, Sarah replied, yes, I'm being selfish, and there's nothing wrong with me. That yes is the most dangerous word a nice person can learn to say. Because once you stop being driven by the desperate fear of losing someone, you are driven by something deeper and infinitely more powerful. The absolute refusal to lose yourself anymore. You stop explaining your boundaries to people who never respected them in the first place. You stop proving your worth to those who took it for granted while they had unlimited access to it. You stop performing the role of the understanding, the available, the one who exists to make others comfortable with their own emotional immaturity. This is what Carl Jung called individuation. The process of becoming whole by embracing and integrating the parts of yourself that you once rejected in order to be loved. The parts that can say no without drowning in guilt. The parts that can choose silence over explaining themselves to people, determined to misunderstand you. The parts that can walk away from love that demands you disappear. Think about it. How many relationships in your life would survive if you stopped being the one who always gave more, cared more, tried harder? Once this integration begins, once you start reclaiming the parts of yourself that you exiled in order to be accepted, you become dangerous. Not because you hurt others, but because you can no longer be hurt in the same ways that once controlled you. You are no longer attracted to arguments that go nowhere and solve nothing. You are no longer seduced by potential that exists only in your imagination. You are no longer moved by excuses that are offered without the behavioral changes to back them up. You have walked through the fire of your own emotional abandonment and discovered something incredible. You did not burn. Instead, you have been reforged into something stronger, clearer, more authentically you than you ever thought possible. Others notice the change immediately, and their reactions tell you everything you need to know about the true nature of your previous relationships. Some people panic. They escalate their demands for your attention, your emotional labor, your availability. They blame you, manipulate you, remind you of all the times they needed you. Others simply disappear. Without your willingness to be their emotional dumping ground, they discover they have no genuine interest in you as a person. The relationship was never mutual, it was extractive. But a precious few, those who truly love you rather than just need you, celebrate your transformation. They were waiting for you to value yourself the way they value you. The way you no longer rush to fill uncomfortable silences in conversations. The way you let their emotions belong to them instead of absorbing them as your own. The way you choose your own peace over their temporary comfort. To those who are using you, it looks like loss. To you, it looks like coming home to yourself after a lifetime of living in exile. In the end, the good guy who awakens isn't vengeful or bitter, or closed off to love. He's free. Free from the exhausting performance of being who others needed him to be, instead of who he really is. Free from the constant anxiety of managing everyone else's emotions while neglecting his own. Free from the crushing weight of believing that her worth was measured by her usefulness to others, rather than her inherent value as a human being. Sarah, 3 years after her transformation, lives a life that would be completely unrecognizable to her former self. She has friends who reciprocate her energy rather than drain her. She has boundaries that are respected rather than constantly tested and pushed. She has learned to feel deeply without drowning in the emotions of others, to love fully without losing herself in the process. She still works as a social worker, but now she approaches her clients from a place of professional compassion rather than personal fantasies of rescue. She can hold space for their pain without absorbing it into her own body. She can care about their outcomes without taking responsibility for their choices. Her romantic relationships have completely transformed. She is no longer attracted to people who need to be fixed or saved. She is attracted to emotional equals, people who can match her depth without requiring her to be their therapist, mother, or emotional support system. The man she is dating now was initially confused by her self-possession. "You're so independent," he said early in their relationship, and she could hear the slight complaint in his voice. The unconscious expectation that love meant unlimited access to her emotional labor. "Yes," she replied simply, "I am." He had to decide whether he wanted to love her or control her, whether he was interested in partnership or possession. Fortunately, he chose love. This is what Carl Jung called the individuated self. A soul no longer divided between pleasing others and honoring itself. You have turned your pain into insight, your silence into sanctuary, each wound into a boundary that protects rather than punishes. The dangerous nice guy isn't dangerous because he becomes cruel or vengeful or closed-hearted. They're dangerous because they can no longer be used, manipulated, or exploited. They're dangerous because they've reclaimed their softness and paired it with an unshakable sense of self-worth. They have learned that real love does not require you to be less than you are, that healthy relationships do not drain you of your life force, that your sensitivity is not a character flaw to be managed, but a superpower to be honored and protected. You have discovered the difference between being loving and being available, between being kind and being exploitable, between being empathetic and being a dumping ground for other people's unprocessed emotions. In a world that feeds on softness, that confuses kindness with weakness and goodness with unlimited availability, the person who claims their softness with wisdom becomes untouchable, not because they are hard or closed off, but because they are complete. You become the light that no longer needs permission to shine. You radiate not because someone gives you validation, but because that is your nature, when you are not diminishing yourself for the comfort of others. The integrated good person loves more purely because they love by choice rather than compulsion. They give more meaningfully because they give from abundance rather than emptiness. They connect more deeply because they are no longer trying to disappear into others to avoid the discomfort of being themselves. This is your individuation. This is your return to yourself. This is your dangerous awakening to your own immeasurable worth. You are not the nice person who breaks under the weight of others' expectations. You are the nice person who has freed themselves from those expectations and discovered their own strength. You are not the one who loves until there is nothing left of themselves. You are the one who has learned that the most loving thing you can do is to remain whole while loving others. The world desperately needs good guys, but it needs good guys who know their worth, who can feel deeply without losing themselves in feeling, who can love fully without abandoning their own hearts in the process, who can give generously without giving themselves completely. Your journey through the shadow, through integration, through the dangerous awakening to your own worth, that's not just personal healing. That's a radical act of love for a world that has forgotten what healthy relationships look like. You become the living example, the walking proof, the breathing demonstration that it is possible to be gentle and strong simultaneously, loving and boundary setting, generous and self-protective. By becoming dangerous to those who would use you, you become safe for those who would truly love you. You become a beacon for other good people who are still drowning in their own compassion, still believing that love means self-sacrifice, still confusing their worth with their willingness to suffer for others. In a world hungry for authentic connection, for relationships built on mutual respect rather than exploitation, for love that heals rather than depletes, your particular brand of dangerous security is exactly what we need. You are not too much. You never have been. You are not too sensitive, too emotional, too careful. You are perfectly calibrated for a world that desperately needs the medicine of conscious empathy. Empathy given by choice, not compulsion. Your journey to wholeness matters not only to you, but to everyone who will benefit from your authentic, bounded, consciously loving presence in this world. And perhaps, in the silence that follows this awakening, you will finally understand. You have always had permission to choose yourself. You just needed to remember how.
If you've made it this far, you've already taken a step beyond most people. You're subscribed to the channel, you watch the videos, you reflect on every idea. Now the question is, how far do you want to take this? If you want to take the next step and truly apply this knowledge to your life, the White Rabbit Codes is ready for you. The link is in the pinned comment. Remember, success is a decision. The choice is yours. Count on me and follow the White Rabbit.